who don't know, Green for All is an organization based out of Oakland, California. We've been around since late 2007, officially since early 2008. Our mission at its core is to help to develop an inclusive green economy strong enough to lift people out of poverty. And so that's the work that we've been doing for the last close to 7 years, give or take. And through that work, we've done a number of things. We do work both on policy from the local to the national level around creating new opportunities in the green economy, and also making sure that the opportunities that are created are made available to everyone. So again, Green for All. We really focus our efforts in communities of color and low-income communities. And through that work, we've also had the opportunity to work to help try to build a stronger movement at the local level. And so we have a number of programs where we work with and partner with local entities and individuals to support the work and try to lift it up at the local level. And that's the work that I've really had the absolute pleasure and honor of doing for the last several years. And so that's been our mission, to try to think about how to shift our economy towards a model that is better for the earth and better for people. All around, and it's a real joy to do that work. And through this work over the last several years, what we've seen is that there's been a number of issues that maintain and persist. And we've seen that issues around the environment and climate change have worsened and are becoming more and more impossible to ignore. And we're also seeing, our economy is continuing to struggle in industries that we've been able to count on, we can no longer count on. And communities like the community here in West Oakland, which is where I'm from, and where Green for All is located, have fewer and fewer opportunities in many ways. And so we are always trying to think about how can we work, work to combat these issues. I want to talk very briefly just about the idea of resilience. So we started looking at resilience a few years ago and really trying to study. The truth of the matter is this idea of community resilience, which we'll get into, has been around for some time, but is very connected to the work that we do here. And so we sort of started just talking to our friends and talking to organizations and individuals who are doing that work to get a sense of, like, what is the definition of resilience that makes sense? And so when we talk about it, I think what's important to recognize is that some of the mainstream definitions of resilience look at resilience as really adaptation and disaster relief. So what happens if a disaster like Katrina hits? How can you make sure that people can survive through that disaster, that people can get food if they need it, that they can get to higher ground if they need to do that? And that's really just sort of part of a working definition. And we really would like to expand that out and recognize that true resilience has to do with communities that can not only, weather the literal storms that may come from climate change, but that are resilient in the face of everyday storms, that are resilient in the storms of economic insecurity that so many communities are facing, and that are resilient in the storm of other issues related to that, whether it might be availability of healthy food or other health issues. So we're really looking at it from a holistic point of view. And we also recognize that if we're talking about low-income communities in this country, if we're talking about many, many communities of color, it's not just good enough to sort of bounce back from a weather event, right? If where we're at on an everyday basis is not adequate and it's not okay and it's not appropriate, then it's not okay to bounce back. We have to work on strategies that will allow us to make gain, that will allow us to leap forward. We like to say here at Green for All, that will allow us to really raise that bottom line for our communities. And so how can we use resilience strategies, and how can we organize around these issues to help do that? So that's what today's about. And that's enough for me. Again, I'm so glad to be here. Very quickly, I'll introduce you to our panelists. And I'll just sort of run through this quickly, and then we'll get to hear from them. I want to remind everybody that we will have a good amount of time for question and answer from everybody who's on the line. If you'd like to submit a question, you can do so by emailing team@greenforall.org. So that's TEAM, team@greenforall.org. And you can also use Twitter to do that as well, and just use the hashtag Resilience101. And so we've got I've got my colleague Samantha Akwe, who's here rocking with me. She's going to be looking for those questions. We'll get to those with probably about 20-25 minutes left in the hour. So thank you again. Thank you for bearing with us through all that madness. and we'll keep it pushing. So up first, we're going to have Kirsten Schwind and Colin Miller. They're here today representing Bay Localized. Bay Localized has been working around these issues for close to a decade. They're really going to be helping us to look at the definition as they see it, how it's shifted, and why it's important. After that, we're going to hear from Chandra Pope. Chandra, hello. Chandra's joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. She's here as part of Rooted LLC, which is an EJ consulting firm that she started with another great organizer down there named Taki. And she's going to help us to see, recognize this is a global issue, really. Green for All approaches it from a national level, and we work locally, but really every city, every region, every town is different in dealing with different issues and has different assets to work with, and so she's going to help us see that through the work they're doing there. And then we're going to come back to the West Coast right here. Mia Yoshitani is the executive director of APEN, which is the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, and we're very glad to have her here. She's been doing this work for 20-plus years and is going to help us to with some of that historical perspective of this work and how it's maybe shifted, but also what is APEN doing, what are some of the good efforts taking place that she knows about, and also how is this issue of community or climate resilience related to issues of environmental justice, which I think is critical to understand. And then finally, we're joined by the Reverend Tyrone Edwards, and he is joining us out of Plaquemines Parish, which is near New Orleans in Louisiana. He organized an effort after Hurricane Katrina to create a relief center for residents of the East Bank. It was the only one of its kind and has continued to do deep work in the community around resilience ever since then. So that's who we got on the line, a real superstar panel, as you can see. And with that, I'd like to welcome Colin and Kirsten to kick us off. Thank you both.
Great. Thank you so much, Julian. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. Just checking. And can you see the slides up on my screen share?
The screen, let's see. Can we see your screen share yet? Not quite yet.
Not quite yet. Let me try that again. Share screen. Info plan. Share. All right, can you see it now?
It's coming, I think. We see all black, and oh, that's your avatar.
Oh. Can you see? All right. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and get started here.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, so welcome. Well, thank you for welcoming us, Julian. It's an honor to be here in the Green for All University webinar with my colleague Colin Miller. I'm Kirsten Schwind, one of the co-founders of Bay Localized. We've been working on resilience from an equity perspective for about the last decade, as Julian mentioned. I'd like to let Colin introduce himself as well.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here, and I've been doing social justice work since I was 16, and been working with Bay Localize for a little over a year now, but I've been working with environmental justice organizations and organizations working to build a more inclusive green economy since 2009. So it's great to be here with you all.
Wonderful. Okay, good. Now,
You might hit the presenter view, Kirsten.
Presenter view. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to stop the screen share. All right. And, okay. So, okay, I'm just going to go through the presentation, and I'm not sure if you can see the slides or not, but maybe Colin can work on the screen share in the meanwhile. Yeah, so a little bit about Bay Localize. Again, we formed about 10 years ago, looking at climate change and realizing there's just terrible ironies around climate change, and that the people who really cause the problem, folks who have really benefited from the industrialization of society, are not the people who are going to be most hardest hit from the problem. And I see it as really like the biggest human rights violation in the history of the world, climate change, and also the biggest violation of the rights of nature as well. And this has to do with the manifestation of capitalism in the United States. And I really appreciate Julian's introduction to the idea of resilience, that it's not just about resilience and bouncing back from the situation we're in right now. We really need to look at the roots of how we got in this situation, the roots of why climate change is happening. It's similar to the roots of why there's so much inequity in our society. And basically, we see resilience as reshaping our systems for meeting our basic human needs and our basic human rights in communities in order to emphasize human rights and the rights of nature. I'll go through that together. So when we look at human rights, we go back to a fabulous document, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And when you think about human rights, you may think about, international human rights, right to life, the right to vote, political rights, and so on. But there's been some really great work documenting how the United States doesn't actually meet its human rights obligations here as well, especially social and economic human rights, which include the right to food, the right to water, the right to housing, the right to education, the right to health care, the right to a living wage, and the right to social services. All those are laid out in Articles 25 and 26 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which was signed by the United States. And so we see this resilience as reshaping our community systems to guarantee human rights and the rights of Mother Earth, and to find the balance between those two things. And in that way, it really is a challenge to a privatized systems, to corporate systems, to systems that are based on profit, when you're basing your systems for meeting your human rights on the needs of your community and the needs of Mother Earth. Colin, would you like to say something about the roots of the crisis?
Yeah, so thanks everybody. Thank you, Kirsten. Kirsten started to talk a little bit more about the roots of the crisis in terms of the origins of this crisis, and I have two slides up here, two images. One is the beautiful image that California artist Fabiana Rodriguez made for the People's Climate March last Sunday, when 400,000 people marched in the streets of New York, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions more, were marching around the world. She made the slide for the 4,000 people that marched in Northern California, here in Oakland. Defend Mother Earth, and that's really what we're talking about. And the other slide is of course the cover of Naomi Klein's latest book, This Changes Everything: Capitalism versus the Climate. And so it's really important for us to understand that the ecological and climate crisis that we're facing is a crisis of the economy itself. And our friends at Movement Generation talk about the root meaning and understanding of the term economy, where it really literally comes from the Greek, eco comes from the Greek word oikos, which means home, and nomi is management of. So what we're talking about with the economy is management of home. And so with the manifestation of globalized, industrialized capitalism, with the endless accumulation of wealth by the few into ever fewer hands, leading to the ever greater misery of the many, this also has devastating impacts in terms of our human impacts on the planet, and our planet's ability to sustain life for current and future generations. So we really need to think about alternative models, and fortunately there are a great deal of alternative models. And when we're talking about building a resilient economy, one that is rooted in our communities, one that is rooted in our ancestral traditions, and that is respectful of our communities, and honoring the rights of our human rights as well as the rights of Mother Earth, we look at 6 different criteria for resilience as we're shaping those different systems. So the first piece is, of course, equity. And that's fundamental to how Localize understands resilience, is that unless a community system is equitable, it's not truly resilient. We also look at quality. Is our food healthy? Is our water clean? Is our transportation systems working well? ecology is critical in terms of how we reuse resources in a way that enables our planet to continue producing them for people in the future. Ownership is really critical. So when we're thinking about the next economy, a solidarity economy or a cooperative economy, there's a lot of different terms that people use for a more resilient economy that would meet human rights and the rights of Mother Earth. Ownership is really key. Moving ownership away from the private sector, away from the corporate sphere, as the trend has been going for the last 20 plus years, back into the public sphere, and not just into the public sphere in terms of a remote and unaccountable government, but really thinking about democratic and participatory ownership by community, particularly communities of color, low-income communities who are most impacted by this crisis and who are leading the way to a just transition. So ownership is really critical. Diversity is also really important in terms of how we value and protect our biological and cultural diversity, and look at redundant systems so that we're not just dependent on one water source. We're dependent on multiple water sources, so that if one fails, if one pipeline fails, then we can turn to another. This is true in crops, in terms of agriculture. If there's an illness in one crop, we can rely on another, or another variety. So indigenous people who have been connected to the earth for thousands of years, more connected land-based peoples than we are currently, and permaculturists understand this principle very well, and to redesign our next economy to meet that criteria. And finally, we look at self-reliance, not just individual self-reliance, although that's a key part of it as well, but also community-level self-reliance, that we provide and we share necessities and emergencies, and we get ready for those emergencies as well. And the final thing I wanted to share is the critical importance of being rooted in our communities. And this is another slide, another image from Fabian Rodriguez. Defend your home, defend your hood, defend your planet. So what we're seeing, as Julian was mentioning, is not only the fast disasters of flooding, fires, storms, hurricanes, etc., which are displacing our communities in very rapid ways. We're also seeing slow and often very intentional disasters of gentrification and displacement of most vulnerable communities from the rising prices driven both by climate change and shortages in goods, as well as by capital accumulation of investors seeking to flip houses as quickly as they can. So resilience is also about the right to stay rooted in your community and have a strong neighborhood base, and have strong tenant protections and plans in case of disaster for how the original community is going to return to that community and be strong in that community. So that's what I'll share for now, and looking forward to your questions. I hope that's enough.
All right, that's awesome, and thank you very much. And I think we'll be able to share at least some or all of that presentation with folks after the fact. Everybody who's RSVP'd will send things like the information so we can get that list. I'll go over it again, the 6 criteria that you guys see in terms of defining this idea of a resilient community. Equity is central. Quality, so not just food, but not just any food, but good food, good transportation, air that's safe to breathe, water that's safe to drink. The ecology, sort of, looking at making sure that there's that the environment and Mother Earth, as you said, we're fighting for Mother Earth, that's right, and the ecology of the system itself. Ownership, and so maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I'd love to hear more about you mentioned some models, but maybe digging into that a little bit more, so hopefully we'll have some time for that. Diversity, both diversity of species and plants and all the rest, and certainly diverse communities, and then self-reliance. How can we draw on the wisdom and assets that we have in our community? So those are the 6. I just wanted to reiterate those. Thank you, Colin and Kirsten, very much for setting us off. And so now I'd like to kick it over to Chandra Pope, who's joining us from Atlanta. And thank you so much for being here, Chandra.
Happy to be here. Hello, everyone. So, thanks, Julian, for inviting me to participate in the webinar. You know, like Julian mentioned, myself along with my partner, Nataki Osborne-Jeltz, as a small consulting practice here in Atlanta where we focus on engaging with low-income and communities of color, authentic engagement around energy, climate, and environmental justice issues, and just ensuring that the voices of the communities that we live in and represent are elevated. And so we were really excited to actually partner with Green for All to pull together an awesome and dynamic group of folks who were informing some of how we are defining resiliency and how folks are organizing the communities which they work in around this issue. And so really, I think today I just wanted to highlight some of the insights that folks provided who participated in that focus group. And I think that, you know, Julian mentioned talking about some of the challenges that folks experience here in the Southeast and in Atlanta, and then sharing some of the assets that we've identified. And so I think the first thing that I wanted to raise that I thought was very insightful was really recognizing that here in the Southeast, that folks may not necessarily be talking about this work from the lens of climate resiliency. We've noticed that people have really, like Colin said, thought about approaching this work in terms of equity, just transition. And, you know, really authentic community engagement. And that's just because we recognize here in the Southeast that the civic infrastructure is still something that is not as strong as we see in other regions of the country. And that, you know, just generally the infrastructure in the Southeast looks differently than it does in other areas of the country. We also recognize that the majority of the major polluters are here in the Southeast, and you know, we are in the belly of the beast, as some would say, being that we have so many red states that we are part of and that are surrounding us. And so really trying to think about if we can win in the Southeast, it feels like we can really win anywhere. And, you know, honestly, considering that we have a history of structured racism here in the Southeast, and so how are we overcoming those challenges as they pertain to thinking about climate resiliency? And so folks are really thinking about, you know, there's a broad way, a broad approach to climate resiliency here in the Southeast. And so while we may not be naming it that, we are thinking about it in ways that really help define it for ourselves and thinking about the impacts, the specific impacts to our community. I think that in terms of assets, we recognize that the Southeast has a lot of land and a lot of forestry. And so how are we creating projects and thinking about opportunities for elevating and maximizing those potentials and those assets? One of the case studies that we elevated and really thought through was the how we were able to leverage our social capital and our social networks. And one of the examples that was given was how we responded to Hurricane Katrina. It's a story that we really don't own much and that we don't tell much about how we actually refuged a lot of folks who were displaced from Hurricane Katrina and how we had to deploy resources and really leverage our social networks. And while, you know, churches and schools and families really did not call themselves centers of climate resiliency, they certainly acted as if. So these are just some of the things that we're thinking about in the Southeast and, you know, how we're trying to really tell our story and participate in the dialogue around the issue.
Great. Thank you so much, Chandra, for sharing. I think one of the last points you made, I think, is really important. I just wanted to hit on it quickly. Is just this idea of, you know, you said that there were churches and schools and individuals and others who were really, you know, worked hard and helped put people up after Katrina and were acting as centers for resilience, I think is the term you use, but didn't necessarily identify themselves as such. And I think that's really important. It's something that we've seen that a lot of these ideas, even, you know, many of the ones that Colin referenced, and certainly the one around self-reliance, these are not new concepts or ideas, but aren't necessarily being thought about or talked about in terms of community resilience or climate resilience. I think that's important to acknowledge, that a lot of this work has and will continue to be done. And I think it's also important to, again, we're talking about definitions and how we define these things. The president right now has a task force that's looking at climate resilience. It's called the President's Resilience Task Force, I think. And what that task force is looking like is going to be recommending to the president and his folks what they should be investing in to help American cities be more resilient to climate change. And what that means is looking at how the federal government wants to begin to distribute money, spend money that would be made available to our cities and others to really combat this. And so if we're not thinking of the work that we're doing in terms of resilience, then we may not be able to access resources that could really help this work be done well. So I think that's an important part of this conversation that I want to highlight, and why we're trying to make sure that we have a strong definition of resilience that's inclusive of all people, that is based on equity and environmental and economic justice, but that also people are starting to identify how their work is connected to this larger concept, and to this concept that is gaining traction in certain circles, and the president is talking about, and the president is wanting to invest in, and the federal government would be investing in. So I just wanted to say that really quickly. So thank you again, Chandra. And up next, we're coming back to Cali, my home state. It's a pleasure to introduce and reintroduce Mia from APEN. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure, and I think the other panelists and yourself, Julian, you all gave a really good intro to community resilience, and I think we have a very similar frame. As a grassroots organization, APEN has been around for about 20 years. We do environmental justice organizing in low-income communities, immigrants and refugees in the API, communities in the Bay Area and in California, really trying to build...
API is Asian Pacific Islander?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
No,
Asian Pacific Islander, that's right.
Yeah, just carry on, sorry.
Totally. Please do call me out on the acronyms and the shorthand. But we're a grassroots environmental justice organization, and we've really evolved into our kind of definition of community resilience and the frame of community resilience as the crisis of climate change has become more and more real in the everyday lives of communities of color and communities who are the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Based on our real lived experience with the economic crisis and some of the things that other folks were mentioning, but with gentrification and displacement, with natural disasters like earthquakes and fires, and actually industrial accidents like refinery explosions that are actually a direct result of extreme energy and the fossil fuel economy. For us, community resilience is not only our ability to continue as an intact community, to maintain our core identity and to bounce back in the face of crisis and change, but it's also to emerge stronger, to emerge more flexible, to be more powerful than we were before, and it enables communities to adjust and adapt in ways that benefit the community in the long run. And for us, that is really rooted, as you were saying before, in key and core environmental justice values that have evolved over the past 50 years of both civil rights and environmental justice movement building. And a lot of those values are similar to ones that have been spoken of already in this webinar. Like one of the main things is that leadership around solutions for community resilience really needs to be rooted in the communities that have been most impacted by the root causes of climate change. So environmental justice is all about addressing root causes. It's about people being able to speak for themselves. It's about impacted and frontline communities being able to articulate their own vision for how they want their community to thrive. And I think that is at the core. That's kind of the heart of our work and how we evolved into being able to address the broader crisis of climate change within that environmental justice frame. And I think the other thing is addressing climate change and the ability of a community to be resilient in the face of climate change is really there's a need for systemic change, and that simple and cosmetic changes are not enough, and the solutions have to go much deeper and much more. They have to be transformative solutions, and that's really the key to it is that building, like transforming our communities to be resilient communities is actually the key to being able to address the crisis itself. So what we build to address climate change, what we build that's rooted in the needs of impacted communities, those are the actual real solutions. Those are the only solutions that are going to work in terms of addressing the climate crisis. So there's an actual, there's a very positive feedback loop directly to the needs of low-income communities and communities of color. So I wanted to try the screen share. Let's see if I can do it.
There it is.
All right. So that's my definition. I'll go on to the other thing. So parts of So our vision for community resiliency is all about being able to, like I said, emerge more powerful, emerge more healthy, improving the quality of life. So I think a key factor is in particular improving community health and making sure that quality of life for all people, and especially those who've been most impacted by climate change, is you see real improvements on the local level, and that the climate mitigation strategies, they need to be locally targeted in our communities in the form of local renewable energy, local regional food systems, zero waste approaches, clean accessible transit, ecosystem restoration, recycling, affordable housing near transit. All of these strategies to addressing climate change, to mitigating climate change, there are things that we can do locally in communities and that bring resources into local communities that really benefit local communities who have been hardest hit. So it's really important as we're talking about building infrastructure to fight climate change, to reduce greenhouse gases, that we're talking about building that infrastructure actually in the communities who have been hardest hit and who are most vulnerable. And that infrastructure needs to be based on democratically controlled infrastructure and that's locally owned and has community scale. Those are things that I heard Colin reference as well. And then lastly, that democratic participation in transitioning to this economy is really key, and that democratic participation results in solutions that have quality jobs that support families, support their need for safe and affordable housing and clean water, healthy food, inspiring education, access to healthcare, and meaningful work. So all these things are possible, and it's not just that they're possible, so we have an opportunity right now to direct benefits, to direct resources into the communities who have been hardest hit, because those are the solutions that are going to work for mitigating climate change. And for me, that's like when we have a vision for what our communities actually want in the end of this. We want the thriving, healthy communities, the economically thriving communities that we want. Those things are the actual solutions that get people excited, that allow people to support the policy that is really going to fundamentally transform the economy to address the problem in the real way that it needs to be addressed. So then how we get there, we talk about these 5 elements of a just transition to resilient communities. And those key things, grassroots organizing to build the next economy now. So you need people who are really engaged in this. You need not just, we need to rely on the deep roots in communities that are already there, and we need to build on that. We need to be able to organize folks and mobilize folks to change the rules on a policy level, on a local level, on a statewide level, and we need to organize folks to move resources, to move actual public investment into these solutions that create resilient communities. And then finally, we need to, or sorry, next to final is shutting down the extractive economy. As we're building up alternative solutions that build resilient communities, we need to use those resilient solutions as basically opposition solutions to the extractive economy that got us here in the first place. And then we need to bridge movements across sectors of the economy, across labor, across church groups, across youth and folks who are organizing around immigration reform, folks who are organizing around conservation issues, and really we need to have a cross-sector movement that allows us to follow the lead of communities who've been most impacted. And then I wanted to just give a few examples of the work that APEN has done around building resilient communities. Things like stopping, this is part of shutting down the extractive economy, stopping the our local Chevron refinery from producing 900,000 more tons of greenhouse gases that actually create a huge amount of health impacts in the local community. So that's part of it, stopping that. But the other part of that is bringing in what the new system of energy will be, an energy system that's clean, that's renewable, and that also keeps resources that communities are normally paying out to large companies, keeping those resources in the community to help build further resilience and resistance to the fossil fuel economy. Other examples are winning at a statewide level millions of dollars in investments as the state has been trying to find strategies to address climate change, to reduce greenhouse gases. One of the things that came out of that was an implementation plan that would make industry reduce its carbon input. And out of that came cap and trade, which we don't agree with, the cap and trade, but cap and trade has raised, is in the process of raising billions of dollars. We ensured that on a state policy level that at least 25% of that directly benefits low-income communities and vulnerable communities. And so this year alone, we're going to see $270 million in investments into environmental justice communities around public transportation, renewable energy, urban forestry, and affordable housing. And those things are really based on the vision that the community has set out for itself. So we're actually really proud of that. We see that as an example of being able to just transition to resilient communities example of how to redirect public money into the community vision that's really going to help us weather the storm and come out stronger on the other side of climate change.
Great. All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mia. That's just totally awesome. And very much appreciated. And hopefully we can get some of that to share with folks after the fact as well. And 5 elements of the transition that we need to make: organize, 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 bridge, and then organize is what I caught from you.
Basically.
Grassroots organizing to build the new economy we want now. Organizing to change the rules from the local all the way up. I love that because it's like, sometimes we get busted for breaking the rules, but it's like sometimes the rules don't serve our communities. Organizing to move the money. Where are our investments taking place? Organizing to shut down this dirty economy. But again, this is all in mind of we can do better. And then, of course, bridging the movement, which I think is very fitting. I know that just last week with the massive climate march in New York and thousands more around the world, there was a real effort and what looked to be a beautiful results in terms of bridging these issues, whether it's the prison industrial complex and the cradle to prison pipeline that needs to be destroyed, or immigration rights issues, and so many more. Some of those connections are really being made, which I think is just tremendously exciting. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. And finally, We got just a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, Reverend Edwards, and then we're going to get into a few questions. We had our technical difficulties, so we're a little behind the time. But I'm really pleased to introduce Reverend Edwards, who's joining us from Louisiana, who's really had to deal with resilience firsthand and mitigation, or excuse me, adaptation in the face of a tremendous disaster, and with Hurricane Katrina, and has continued to be a stalwart in the community organizing around these issues. So Tyrone, thank you for being here. And you're muted, so unmute yourself if you could.
Okay,
there you are.
Are we in now?
You're in.
Thank you. Thank everybody for who had something to do with us being on the line. We coming from Plaquemine Parish, Louisiana. The name of our organization is Design Travel Cooperative Center. I just want to deal with the part about resiliency first, because I've been doing this work for 44 years, and resiliency has been a very new term for us. We've always dealt with the issue of self-determination. And as the young sister from Atlanta, Polk, and Mia saying is that we come from a history of being dehumanized as slavery was a dehumanizing process, Jim Crow segregation. So resiliency wasn't a word at that time. It was about us, self-determination and surviving. I believe that resiliency came about as a result of disasters, hurricanes that a lot of white people started experiencing, so they had to come up with a language. But we have been dealing with tragedy all our lives. So to us, it's about self-determination, and that's the language that we will continue to use, because it's a true self-determination that helps us. But not only just about self-determination within itself, but we also believe that we had to go through some transformative experience, and part of our transformative experience, some things that guide us to do our work and our self-determination, is our passion. And we have to maintain our passion. Not only maintain our passion leads us into understanding what our purpose as a community around climate change, around all the things that's happening, but understand the power that we have as a community to deal with all the things that happen with us. But and more important, the last part is that our ability to partnership with other people. And the only way we was able to rebound after Hurricane Katrina, it wasn't because of government, but it was our networking and partnership with women's organizations, with faith-based organizations, environmental justice organization, philanthropist organization. And so as a result of us doing that, but we came together around a theme, a biblical, in the Bible saying, let us arise and rebuild. So we understood that we had to do it because the government wasn't there. And so we rebuilt our community, we created affordable housing, we renovated housing, we created community park. But more important, when the government started building, we made sure that the new school, the community center that was built, that we had an input and it was elevated high so we can use them for shelter for future hurricanes. So to us, it's not about resiliency as much as it's self-determination. And we just think that there must be a serious movement in this country to make the government look at climate change, because we all understand that we are steward of our environment. The thing that I think is important is that the government have yet to really take a serious stand against climate change. I spoke before a House committee in Washington not too long ago that your representative for California, I think his name is Waxman Sponsor, and he told us straight out, he said, Reverend, we're not ready to deal with climate change because of our relationship with corporations in this country. So we have to get them to not thinking about making green money and going green. And so, but that's going to take effort when young people, other people get involved in it. So to us, it is really about self-determination, but also how resources are given to the most vulnerable community. Our community, we came through Hurricane Katrina, but we came through Isaac. We still have a community after Hurricane Isaac. You just only 8 miles from me, where you got over 300 people still been displaced, haven't came back home because we don't have the government kind of support we need to build higher levees, and to build a wetland. So to us, it's more about self-determination for us, and now we was able to rebuild to self-determination and networking with a lot of people around this country. It made it possible for us to do work, and we're still working on climate change. We have a program with young people called Connecting Children to the Environment. so that they can even evolve and better stewards in the environment. So they're growing garden, they're growing the food, they're going back to what we used to do in the rural community, growing our own food. We don't have to worry about all the things that we're eating because we know we grew our food. So we're involved in those kind of projects. We're still involved with holding our government responsible. So anyway, thank you for the time. I want to stop because 5 minutes, can pass pretty quick. But I hope you understand what I was able to depart in these few minutes.
Mic on. Reverend Edwards, thank you so much for sharing that, and I appreciate. I'm sorry we don't have more time. We may have to have you back on at a later date, but really appreciate that. I really like the idea of what you said, and I think I heard it echoed throughout that resilience is really about self-determination, and recognizing that we really, our communities, have the solutions, and Mia really made this point. The only solutions that are work are the ones that are going to be developed by the communities most affected by this. So we really have to lean on that. All of us, regardless of what community we're in, have to lean on that leadership. So with that, we have about 7 or 8 minutes for questions, which I'm so happy to hear. We've already got some really great questions. If you'd like to submit a question, I don't know that we'll have time for it, but if we do, we'll try to get to it. Again, how you do that is email team@greenforall.org, or you can use the Twitter hashtag resilience101. So we're going to get into a couple questions. I'll just say this one. I think it's a good question, and I don't know that we'll have to address it now, but I wanted to holler at Mitch, who is joining us. He says many of the Pacific Islands are facing crisis on a daily basis. Many of the solutions that we are working on for the islands would work in other U.S. cities. How can we share solutions between remote desert islands and socially isolated mainland urban islands? I think it's a really good question, and maybe I don't know if there's anybody online who has a quick response to that, but I thought it was one. I just wanted to highlight and acknowledge that really, when we talk about the front line of climate change, those island nations, that's it. That is the front line. And so I think, again, this idea of the folks that are most affected by this are the ones with the solutions, that couldn't be more relevant for folks in the Pacific Islands. And so I think we do need to be thinking about ways to make those connections. I want to direct this one to Colin, and then others can chime in, or Colin and Kirsten. What sort of capacity building tools have been developed or are being used in regards to resiliency and climate change? This is coming from Vero, who's on Twitter.
All right. Well, there's a lot of great tools out there, and I definitely recommend that people study more deeply, the 5 elements of a just transition that Mia was talking about, coming from the Climate Justice Alliance's Our Power campaign. Those are really, really critical elements of a just transition to a resilient economy and a resilient, equitable communities. And Bay Localize has also developed a set of tools, and I will see if I can pull up on my screen here what those tools look like. But it's called the Community Resilience Toolkit 2.0, and we've actually developed this toolkit for use in any community, and it's been downloaded by folks in over 30 countries and over 40 U.S. states. So all over the world, people are using this to make their communities more resilient.
Colin, for time's sake, I know I want to apologize. For time's sake, I'm wondering, maybe just talk through it a little bit. Oh, it looks like you got it up. So just very briefly, just because I want to be able to get some more questions. And I will say that we will make sure to get this link out to everybody, all the 420 people who RSVP'd. But carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For time's sake, I think we're happy just to send it out afterwards, since we do only have a few minutes left. But it's available for free on our website. It's the Community Resilience Toolkit, and it goes through all the different systems that Mia talked about. There's an assessment system. There's the roots of equity and resilience, looking at the history of how grassroots organizing for racial economic justice is really the roots of organizing for resilience as well, and ability to make a plan as well for how to strengthen and make your community more resilient, and how to create jobs in your community by addressing those climate risks and by making your community more resilient. So those are all different aspects of it, and I'll send the link out so everyone can download it for free.
Great, that's awesome. Does anybody of our other panelists like to add any resources that you see being super helpful, critical, awesome? Cool. I will say if there are other resources that we're not hearing about now, we'll get to them. We'll get them in a follow-up email. So if there's other resources, we'll make sure to have that. So these next two questions are sort of related. So if you had, and maybe we'll start with Mia with this, if you had the opportunity to direct the resources of governments, what would be your top 3 priority areas to support community resilience in an equitable way? And then with that, what would be the outcomes that you would expect or hope to see from those investments?
Sure. So in some ways that's sort of a trick question, because what we're saying is actually the priorities need to come from individual communities. So I wouldn't pick what are the top priorities for your community, but I will say that after doing a lot of kind of community listening, and we did our own sort of investigative interviews with community folks all across California to talk about how to best direct the greenhouse gas reduction fund that I was talking about, that was created out of California's climate laws. And as I was saying before, there's 270 million of that just this year going into investments in low-income communities, specifically around renewable energy and energy efficiency that creates local jobs, that creates local infrastructure in the hardest hit communities, and public transit and public transportation, affordable housing in transit-rich areas, and urban forestry and urban agriculture. So those were priorities that came from communities around California that we talked to, and we pushed for those key priorities during the budget negotiations, and we're able to get 100% of the priorities that we wanted for that public fund.
All right, organized. That's great. Cool. And this is a related question, and maybe I'll kick this to Chandra and or the Reverend. This is from Elizabeth Sawin. Do any of the panelists have a short list of the investments that would provide benefits both 365 days a year and in the period after a disaster? So, and I would say investments and just, what are, sort of efforts or ways that we should be thinking about that? And either one of you can start.
Well, I just think am I on?
Yep.
Yeah, to us, the development of the wetlands to prevent wind surge for hurricane is very important to us, because we don't have a frontline defense for when hurricane comes. The other thing for us is affordable housing. We were able to do it as a nonprofit organization, but imagine what could happen if the government would come in. And the third is, how do we invest money into all the community entrepreneurship that young people in our community want to do, and put businesses in that they can benefit. So those are 3 things that I think keep for where we live at in Plaquemine Parish.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Anything to add to that, Chandra?
No, I think I just underscore what both Mia and the Reverend were saying about, really thinking about equitable development and access to and skills building for the green economy and jobs. And then I would just say civic infrastructure, really thinking about some of the strength that we have in our social networks, and really investing in building political capital and civic infrastructure so that we do have folks who can advocate for responsible energy policies.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Well, with that, it brings us to the end of our time, which makes me so sad. It's so fun. I want to do this for another hour. But we don't have time today. So what I would like to do is I want to thank all of our panelists from the bottom of my heart. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for your continued efforts that I know you pour your energy into every day, day in and day out. So we're so grateful to you for that. I really want to thank everybody who's joined us today. We will send a follow-up. We'll probably try to edit this down so that we can cut out all of the feedback that we heard at the beginning, and we'll have a video that you can reference. We'll also make sure we get any of the resources that our panelists provided today. One more thing I'll say is this is the first in what we hope to be a series called Green for All University. We're taking ourselves back to school. We want to go there with you. We're drawing on the brilliance and expertise of our broad community here at Green for all the great people doing great work around the country. So one thing I will say is we want to investigate. This was 101, right? So we want to start to dig into these different elements. So maybe we'll be looking at some of these alternative economic models. I know that's an area that we have great interest is looking at, alternative economic models and the sharing economy and the alternative I'm going to say it a third time, alternative economic models. Maybe we'll look at the role that food plays. I know Mia talked a lot about, and Kirsten as well, just about this need for the local, right, local opportunities, local food options. So we'll dig into that. And we'll dig into whatever else you all want to talk about. So please use that team at Green for All. You can email me, Julian, Julian, @greenforall.org. Give us your ideas. Let us know if you would be an expert that we can have on the line, or you know somebody doing good work. That's how we're going to create this university. It's a communiversity, is what we'll call it. So we're going to keep doing this moving forward. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful Wednesday. Goodbye.